I want to welcome Joe Justice as a guest to this podcast. Serial entrepreneur with Wikispeed as one of his companies, trying to revolutionize how a car is designed. He's a Scrum Master, author, TEDx talker, and also a former Tesla employee with details of the inside Tesla. Welcome, Joe Justice.
John, it's my pleasure. Globally, what's happening now, which we'll talk about in much more detail as we go along, is surprising and not completely understood, maybe by anyone. So your podcast and its global reach is going to help a lot more people decide if they're interested or not and go as deep as they want to. I love seeing the book Toyota Kata on the wall behind you and observing that the Toyota production system, TPS, became famous for producing cars at such low cost with such higher profit margin. People were confused. How is a car made in Wolfsburg and a car made by a Toyota property, arguably a comparable product? Why is it that Toyota makes so much more money per car? Why is the cost to produce so much less? People were so intrigued by this question, they started traveling to Toyota. They started learning some Japanese words, Kaizen, Kaikaku, Hansei, trying to understand this system. Let's remember the reason for that business interest was, why is the profit per vehicle so much more when Toyota makes arguably a similar intent vehicle? Well, in Q3 of 2022, those numbers were recently published. Tesla showed their profit per vehicle was $9,570 per vehicle. That's 8 times as much as Toyota. Agile has completely replaced the business proposition of lean and the Toyota production system. And many of us are surprised because there's still many more advantages most of us are finding for plain old lean in most companies. We're still not at the end of it. So what's this Agile thing that's 8x? This is interesting to understand in a hardware context, in a whole company context. And I'm glad that's part of what we get to explore here together today.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. And you have worked with a lot of big names. You worked with Bill Gates. You worked in Amazon with Jeff Bezos, and you have also worked with Elon Musk in Tesla, and that's part of the reason your stories from there. I think it's very interesting. You are also making your own kind of concept within Wikispeed and building a car actually in a new way. You're trying to revolutionize how that's done, and in a way, I think we're in a very important moment in time now, because it's kind of, I see it almost as these volcanoes ready to disrupt, because you have AI, who is a very exciting thing. You have this science side. You have this Neuralink side of things that is very special. You have this sensor technology with IoT and stuff like that, who is really in the edge of becoming something. You can start censoring thing, and you can start adding machine learning to that. And you have also this energy revolution or transport revolution, or whatever you should call it, because you have vehicles going from fossil fuel down to more sustainable way of fueling them. You have also this traveling with drones and so on, and you have almost a revolution with the space travels and so on. So it's a lot of thing within energy/travel also that is way up there. And you have this, what you're talking about, the organization of really taking things beyond lean in a way. Because I heard, first time I heard that from Elon Musk, he said that from about the Fremont factory. We are now beyond lean. And I was thinking, another CEO that doesn't understand what lean is. And that was my first reaction. And your view on it is that this is agile that's been added, but it's also lean startup, right? It's also the even more high pace way of thinking.
It's difficult to label because no label is completely understood to be the same between even just two people. And then any label simplifies and makes two-dimensional out of something that is inherently four-dimensional or more dimensions, right? So it's also a simplification. So it's a misunderstood simplification for any label. Agile, for example, the definition of Agile, the Agile Manifesto in 2001, says delivering working software, and already I'll paraphrase that to say customer visible value, but delivering something from a couple of weeks to a couple of months with a preference to a shorter timescale. So that means the definition strictly doesn't apply if you're faster than a couple of weeks. And many companies are faster than a couple of weeks. So already that word is outmoded. It was pretty strong in 2001. But what better word do we have? Lean startup is phenomenal. However, it's not as broadly understood. Part of lean startup is a test and learn aspect, which doesn't necessarily, in most people's mind, include the production processes, the vendor management, the collaboration, the mission-driven universal basic income workforce. These packed processes, this entire phenomenon that's emerging. Part of what makes the Musk companies, in my experience and having worked inside them, so phenomenally effective is you have this sense of mission above profit. And that's definitely not new, but it's new, again, at least, in a mass production hard goods international company. That's uncommon and, again, new. And it's enormously powerful. Well, what about that? What do we label that? I'd really like to call at least what Elon's doing. And Elon's not the only emergent player here. As you mentioned, I have my own car company and we set 4 world records ourselves. And I'm really proud of what we did. And we're not the only ones either. WikiSpeed is that project. But Musk, just that thread is intriguing, interesting, deep, and rich. And I'd like to call it the Musk model. The challenge is, I don't think anyone understands all of what Elon is trying to do except Elon. And so I don't think anyone could say, here is the Musk model, I've defined it, except for Elon. So as much as I want to, instead I say, here's as much as I understand of the Musk model. And I say, since it's limited by my understanding, I call it Joe DX. DX is a well understood term in Asia for digitalization, which starts to encompass the breadth of what we're talking about here. It's not understood to mean that in, as far as I know, any other market except Asia. So I don't know if that's the right nomenclature, the right wording either. But the idea is a lot of this stuff is changing broadly. The way people work, why people work, how suppliers work, what contracts mean, what money means, what rule of law implies because of digitalization. So DX is at least a very broad term. And then Agile is at least understood as moving faster by most people. So maybe we can get some utility out of these phrases, even if none of these labels are perfect.
Yeah, exactly. I've actually gone back to the roots because scientific management and some kind of lean thing were happening there. They were starting with standardization. They were starting to think about the process of getting flow in the process and so on. So I've learned from a guy called Laurie Koskela, who is a great thinker within lean construction, where I come from. That's my business in a way, and there he's taking it back to Aristotle and Plato actually, where Aristotle was had this process view and thing view. So it's a metaphysical view, and I do that because lean isn't sufficient to explain things. Agile isn't sufficient to explain things very often. You have to have at least the process view is to see the dynamics in things and see that there is a potential for change, and there is I think the phrase where the same man can't go out in the same river. It's not the same man, and it's not even the same river. I think that's kind of going back there is the point that it's so much is happening here, and it's so much dynamic at play here. And with machine learning and everything that comes into that, it's going to speed up so fast where it can even go AI on us in a way. We can't even not understand what's happening. And I think this is a very important moment of time. And the kind of scary thing, but he's probably not the worst person, but all the threads are pointing to Elon Musk. He's holding all of these, he's on top of all of these volcanoes, so in a way. And that's in a way we give him a lot of trust then, and it's almost he looks like a nice guy. So I hope you can confirm that, Joe, because it's a lot of things happening around him, and we just got a little glimpse with ChatGPT, and yeah, he's behind there also. So he's really making things happening now.
It's pretty special what's occurring in the lifetimes that you and I are sharing right now. It's pretty special. Yeah. And Elon Musk is a mover in these times. In fact, at a possibly unique level. I would assert unique. And then it's probably good for all of our listeners to understand my bias, where my background is. So I've consulted to Tesla since 2010. Then I set up the first agile trainings in Tesla in 2016, then joined as a full-time employee in 2020 and operated the agile program at Tesla. I retired 34 days later. The stock price went up approximately 800% during that time that I was a full-time employee. So I was not a Tesla employee very long, but my relationship with the company is, is 12 years long. Then I realized I'm a workaholic, and I went back to work, set up several companies, not just one, but several. I guess I got inspired by Elon with multiple companies. And then my perspective, so my bias carried into this conversation, is I do choose to believe that Elon is actually mission driven, that Elon is actually attempting to improve the environment for life. And not just on Earth, but out among the stars, and trying to create a more interesting future where life, not just humans, are not limited to just one planet, because that is fundamentally more interesting. I choose to believe, and the evidence that I've been exposed to so far encourages me to choose to believe, that backing Elon, no one is perfect, but Elon's pretty amazing, great, and has my respect at a level of maybe no one else living or dead ever. So my biases will be, I attempt to be open to new information, but I'm a real fan. And so strongly that I think if we really made evidence-based decisions with large amounts of money, every government in the world should tithe some percent of total taxation directly to Elon. 1, 2, 10, 20%. If we actually wanted an exciting future, any other move would be self-limiting and silly in retrospect. So I'm an enormous supporter. And in fact, I do that with my own funds. I attempt to buy Musk Company products with approximately 20% of my earnings each year. And I try to do high profit margin subscriptions, like services, like Starlink is my backup internet. And that doesn't cost much just to have the subscription going to them, right? So it's a high profit, high leverage piece. And I own stock as well. Yeah.
I just forgot Starlink. He's into everything, and it's all revolution. And I am not representing his fan club, but I am kind of a fan. But that's it's not just because it's not just this idle fan. It's because he's actually doing something, and we should talk a little bit more about what actually is happening there, because then people would just think of us as someone who is seeing his wealth and what he's made and thinking that's the consequence of what he has done. It's not, and you are I've heard you say before that the Tesla stock is not overrated, and I think that's also very interesting too, because that's kind of the main thing. This can't be happening. It can't be that much, and so on. But if we go down to the detail, I find it very interesting when you're talking about how they're doing the sprints and how they're doing their shifts, because that's part of the core in the company, and we can talk more about that. I think that's very interesting, and also how he uses principles. That's a very interesting topic for me to discuss more. But if we start with the sprints, I have a couple of sprint books behind me here, and a lot of them are talking about 2 to 4 week sprints. And of course, we have the lean startup, who is kind of challenging that. It's minimal viable product, so as minimal as you can make it. But you're talking about many sprints per day in Tesla. Is that correct?
Right. Well, the word sprint and is popularized by a framework called Scrum. Some of our listeners might be very familiar with, some might not be. None of those words are used in any of the Musk companies. No one says Scrum, no one says sprints, and even operating the Agile program, I didn't choose to reintroduce those terms. But for people on the outside trying to understand what's going on, I find the idea of a sprint to be a useful analogy. But we could just as easily say lean startup. They're definitely not saying sprint inside Tesla, or weren't in 2020 when I was in the company. But they weren't saying lean startup either. But the concept I'm trying to say here is from allocating budget or from taking budget to building the thing, testing the thing, and putting it into production so it's sold. In the case of Tesla, a change to a car. I'll call that an iteration. You could call it a lean startup. Many people might understand that to be what was originally intended by sprint, not a limited piece of time, but a sequence of complete design, build, test, and release. Yeah. So I'm trying to say that design, build, test, and release all together, including monetization on the front and the back, taking money in and then getting money back. That's a cycle. And the simple idea is do that as fast as you can and have as much value, improvement, innovation happen each time you do that. And Musk has said as much. Musk doesn't use any of these agile words. Musk says pace of innovation is the only thing that matters in the long run. And how you measure that is how frequent are your changes to the customer and how much value increase is there per change. That's it. It's the fundamental mathematics of the way Musk sees a business endeavor. And apparently that's working in rockets, cars, energy, AI. People currently are still critiquing Twitter, although not as heavily as they were a few months ago. But Twitter already is dramatically in a financially superior position publicly than it was before Musk's takeover. So if we're simply measuring the business mechanics of it, it's phenomenally successful in Twitter as well. So it works, is what I'm saying here. And you could call that an iteration, a lean startup, even a sprint. None of those words were used inside the Musk companies. But yes, they're very often as short as 3 hours or even less, which is bizarre. I did work in Toyota and many automotive companies, but Toyota is the famous one for lean, for TPS. A 2.5-year change is typically referred to as a minor model change, an MMC. And sometimes it's a little faster, but in general, it's 2.5 years. In Tesla, that's about a weekend. Yeah. The speed difference is ridiculous. It feels very matter of fact in the company. It doesn't feel strange. Simply, the other companies I was in feel very slow.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I've been inspired by one of the interviews done by you before, actually, and I called it sprint because I feel that, and you kind of encouraged in that interview that people have to get on the train, and it's a bullet train in a way. It's something. It's going very fast already. So if you don't understand what he's doing, at least in the car industry, if they don't really jump on the train, they will lose momentum pretty fast because things are happening so fast now. And I get inspired by that, and I just to try to bring it down to my world. I'm in education now, and I have university students, and I was inspired by what you said on that video, and I said I called it sprint, and I now call it sprint, and I saw that not it was COVID period and so on, and we were coming back here in Norway, and I saw that I didn't manage to fill up the classroom as I used to, and then I said, okay, let's try to be inspired by Joe Justice here, and I'll say that I'll make, after I've done my lecture, it's 3-hour lecture very often, then I have a 3-hour sprint, and the students doesn't know what's in this sprint before it starts. So after the lecture, they know what the sprint is, then they get the sprint and they do the sprint. And they have homework. Before, I couldn't make my students do homework because everybody was fixed on the exam that was 1 year or in the end of the semester. So they kind of relaxed and enjoyed life in a way. But with this sprint, they get homework, so they actually do their homework. I can see that they do their homework. They are actually paying attention in the classroom because they know that this is very relevant for us in a couple of hours. Then we're going to be asked something about this. And they do this sprint, and it's a task, and it's graded, and they can choose if they want to have the grade or improve. For my point is not about the grading. That's just a result KPI. My point is learning. So trying to get learning into the students is my goal. It's not about getting the grades in a way. It's much more important that they understand things. So when they've gone through this type of sprint, they are kind of clear for the subject, so they can concentrate on the next subject. Because I see that a busy student today has a lot of tasks they have to do, and they use a lot of waste time just to sort it out, and they get stressed, and they kind of, when should I do that? I have a big task there, and they do a lot of trying to make the week a whole work week in a way, or a whole study week. And by doing this in sprints, so it's kind of, and I think that kind of applies to a lot of businesses, that you can actually think more of, we start now with this, and the end result should be this, and just deliver it, just get it out there so people can see it and get your feedback on that, or whatever you do, because we have a tendency to hold things back and kind of pitch perfect. We're trying to really make it perfect before we dare. So it's of course inspired by lean startup, that you should just get it out there and should test it. But do you agree about? I'm not. We should probably not call it sprint then, but it's. I find it just by that little thing, it's making it effective, and it's doing something. And the first year I did this, I saw that I could actually see that the student was on a very much higher level than the year before. In a way, when it comes to they had an oral exam also, so that it was kind of I saw that the level had risen. So I'm not sure if I've kind of catched because it was truly based on your video that I thought I want to try this, because I've never heard of 3-hour sprints, and for me it was a very visual picture. I was thinking 2 weeks, and suddenly could go down to 3 hours.
Amazing you were able to do that in education. Absolutely phenomenal. And your students then, everyone who's touched or been a part of your program, knows that that's possible and carries that forward with them. Absolutely, congratulations and thank you. I imagine instruction closer to what you just described is the only relevant form of instruction currently. And project-based learning, for example, has a tremendous body of evidence at having deeper understanding and longer retention with higher fidelity than lecture, writing, etc. And group project-based learning, depending on how it's conducted, has even higher success rates. The idea of time boxing it so students can then relax the mind and change gears if they have to, change topics if they have to, sounds phenomenal. It seems the system that you've packaged is likely the highest utility system available to us. Now, Chat GPT is big news right now, today, last week, and etc. I imagine AI guided learning is going to give us some interesting new possibilities that we didn't have at the same level just a few weeks ago, and I imagine that will continue. But I'd be surprised if it's not still project-based, if it's not still even better with some types of group, and if it's not even better on some kind of a rhythm. Exactly as you've been saying, I think, if I heard you.
Yeah, very good. And another interesting thing that the sprints and they're doing shift, and they're doing 12-hour shift around the clock with engineers. That's also pretty unique.
There's a few benefits and a few downsides to the way work is handled in all Musk companies. It's optimized for excitement, for becoming enthusiastic. Not almost, everything that can be controlled is to amplify excitement, engagement, interest, a success feeling, a feeling of confidence. The way group work is orchestrated is to maximize confidence. The way the shifts or handoffs or work is encouraged is to remove the sense of individual ownership, instead to have an idea of group ownership and group success, and to make success often enough that it's continually exciting. The company is extremely gamified, and that probably makes people think something that's not what I'm trying to say. Gamified in the sense that a game where you continually get feedback that you're playing the game well, like good sounds, like doot doot doot, or whatever the game's feedback mechanism is. Imagine a game where you don't get that feedback for a few days. You're like, I'm not really sure if I'm playing the game right. I'm not that excited to play the game. That's what most of us call work. And in the Musk companies, it's not like doot, 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 or some sound, but there's a little bit of that. It's that you truly make a successful release frequent enough to keep your engagement up. Whereas most companies, it's weeks, months, or years between a piece of a project you were working on be accepted as done, but it may not ever be used, and it might not be the entire system. So it's hard to feel as much success as we might want. And so a lot of us leave work and go watch sports so we can empathize with whichever team won, or even whichever team had a good move, or even whichever team lost. Or we build a treehouse with our family and friends because we can see it coming together and it get done. Many people in jobs where they don't feel as passionate say, I want to go make cabinets. I want to go do woodworking or something, or do art, because they can see it evolving and get done, and they can feel the sense of release. Well, the Musk companies, as a group in these shifts, the shifts are long enough that even a new group or a group that's struggling will get something important, meaningful, and satisfying done before they leave. And that's incredibly important when you want the level of engagement they're aiming for. These are all very mission-driven companies. I think people who are profit-driven tend to stay away from the way Musk drives a company. Interestingly, the Musk companies are the #1 places to work by engineers, at least, all around the world. So it works. But people who have primarily a profit motive, which is apparently a subset of the technical professions, interestingly, tend to stay away. And it doesn't mean you don't make a lot of money in the Musk companies. You absolutely do. A lot of the people I worked with already had $1 million US, and they continued to work in the company because they liked the work and were passionate about the mission. All the Musk companies are phrased in terms of mission. And what I believe I experienced is easy profit choices were skipped intentionally to do the more difficult mission-based choice. And although that's exhausting, and depleting, it keeps the inspiration up, which I believe is the natural counter to exhaustion or depletion.
Mm. But you have also talked about the strain in a way. You have talked about you have to if you are a new Tesla employee, you have to get fit before you start the job in a way, because
Yeah.
it's actually it's really hard work. So
Yeah.
in a way, all companies can't be like that, right? Because they're attracting very good people probably. It's kind of tempting to be there. But you're talking about you have respect for people who manage to stay in the system for half a year, or I've heard something like that. That's
Yes.
almost inhuman to be.
Good
Is
word
it?
choice. Good word choice. You might be exactly right with that word choice. My current passion topic is to attempt to evolve what I've learned into something that people of very different energy levels, time capacities, and interest levels would want to do. And it's as near as effective, or maybe even more, as what's happening in, for example, the Musk companies now. That's absolutely my passion topic. Yeah, the way the Musk companies were in 2020, at least, that's the last time I was inside as a full-time employee, was extremely intense. It was very satisfying, but it's definitely not something every energy level and fitness could do. So what about the other companies? What about other people? For example, people who have 2 good hours of clear thinking and high contribution a day. Or honestly, I'll make it really broad. What about kids? I have these 2 awesome kids. They're phenomenally creative, and they want to play work. They don't even call it play. They wanted to go to Tesla with me. They want to do almost everything I do, and I actually want to do almost everything they do too. And I've played at a high enough level professionally, I believe, that when I say these and almost every child I've ever met has meaningful contributions to make, and they want to make them, that I think that's a missed opportunity for most companies. I'm not trying to endorse child labor. I'm trying to say their education and play could be a lot more like real work. And then many people who have retired didn't want to retire, or still have some contribution they want to continue making, but on their terms, on their energy level. Some of them are phenomenally fit, much more than me, etc. Some have a few good hours a day of clear thinking energy, and they want to use it. Maybe 45 minutes a day, and they want to use it. Well, I think one gauge of success for what I'm after now is a system that kids could play in a meaningful, productive way if they wanted to. And people of all ages and energy level could play in a productive, meaningful way if they wanted to. If a system meets that bar and comes anywhere near, or maybe even more so, effective than the system in the Musk companies, then I feel my time alive has been something I'm proud of. Oh, wow, I'd love to help evolve, share, and popularize something like that. Currently, the fastest I've seen anywhere in the world is what's happening in the Musk companies. And it does require a very high level of intensity and fitness and dedication and exchange for other things. The World Cup was not long ago. I think a good analogy is the Musk companies are the World Cup of business. Some people want to just play soccer, football. Some people want to try to challenge for the World Cup. It's a different level of training and intensity. The Musk companies are people who are trying to train to have a shot at the World Cup. Not everyone wants to do that. Okay, well, how do you make the game of football, the game of soccer, so it's still fun and worthwhile for people who don't necessarily want to change their diet, change their habits, change their relationships to optimize for their football schedule?
Exactly. And that's one thing where they are using this intense work, and I think it's interesting that you say that you kind of it's enough for people to just be there for that period that they manage to be there, and they have an experience for life in a way, and they can go back to other types of jobs and kind of be. I've been there. I've been with that journey. I think that's an interesting concept, and I think it's also something that big companies could think of internally, that you kind of make this elite group that kind of speeds up things, and you can go in there and you kind of, it's not that good family planning to be inside there. I think you have to if you're working 12-hour shifts, it can be hard work, but of course they are not working all the time 12-hour shift. They have what's their cyclus of shift? Is it 5 days, or how do they work?
When I was an employee in 2020, you have 3 12-hour shifts in a week in a row. And so 36 hours, and then you're off for 4 days. Then the next week you have 4 12-hour shifts and you're off for 3 days. And the average is 40 hours a week. That makes it legal in, I believe, every country, because your total aggregate time, even though the shift length is long, your total aggregate time is within the legal limits. Now, you're not prevented, at least in the United States. I was under California law. I was in Fremont, California in 2020. That was the world headquarters. In California law, you're not prevented from overtime. So you could choose to work more days a week, and you could choose to work even longer hours. Many times I came in at 4 a.m. and left at 7 p.m., so longer than 12 hours. And some people worked 7 days. This was their passion. This was what they chose to do with their time. But that was not the legal schedule. And there was no penalty that I was ever aware of for not doing the absolute minimum at all. Now, you needed to do useful work during your scheduled time, but you could leave. I never saw anyone get a bad look or a bad comment for leaving at their time. That some people might imagine that. That's not the culture as I experienced it. But I did see people that were there, as far as I know, 7 days. I mean, I did not work 7-day weeks.
And one of the reasons for 12-hour shift is, of course, that you get a handover to the next shift that's live. So when you wake up the next morning, you get a handover for people who are kind of evolved the product. So you don't have to think about yesterday. This is the current status. So you get someone with kind of all their energy into it that could transfer it to you as a engineering task. That's one of the effects. And the other effect is probably that you are concentrated fully on it. You don't spend your days thinking about picking up kids and delivering and all that kind of stuff. You're kind of dedicated to work. So you're kind of inside a sprint, or at least you're inside not being disturbed in a way. Is that the main effects of this organization?
Yes, that's exactly my understanding of the main effects. Exactly as you said.
And you also have spoken that in Elon Musk's companies, he has a very flat structure. You don't have the typical hierarchy. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because I find that also very fascinating. He is not using the principle go to Gamba. He is at Gamba. It's not he's already there.
There's not another place to be.
No, exactly.
If there were another place, it'd be converted immediately to more Gemba. Like the wish for growth is currently insatiable. Elon recognizes 3 levels, and it sounds pretty traditional. So then I'll try to explain a little bit, because in practice there are no levels. But Elon does recognize 3 levels. Elon talks about the team, and then managers, and then executives. Okay, that sounds not too different than most of the world. So what is it actually like inside? There is 0 difference between any of those 3 people inside. In fact, you wouldn't even know to look, talk, or work at anyone. What is different is people have signed up for different levels of legal accountability. And it's not a pay raise, and you don't have additional power. You don't get to tell people what to do. The DSM does that. The digital self-management indicates what people should probably be doing. So that's not a manager or an executive role. What a manager or an executive means is that you've signed on to go to court if something really bad happens while you're there. You will do the deposition. You will go talk to the health and safety board, whatever the issue could be. And that's a volunteer additional accountability with no additional compensation. So of course, Musk has a lot of respect for people who choose to do those things. Musk directly takes ultimate and final accountability for all and every action. It's completely legally structured that way. Musk is maximally, as an individual, legally accountable for anything those companies do. Hey, Musk has taken that on. And Musk takes no salary. So, no. I mean, he models it. So what does a leader mean? I find this to be an exceptionally useful concept. A leader is an ideal contributor, period. That's it. There are no people who are not working like directly on the products, welding, unloading trucks, programming. And in fact, it's a mix. There's no one who doesn't physically work, Elon Musk included. Everyone helps unload trucks. That helps keep the company feeling flat. Or whatever needs to be done. If a production elevator jams, everyone is trying to unjam it because that is fundamentally limiting production now. Everyone, period. If the number one need is to write Python code, everybody tries. It doesn't mean people completely waste their time, but it means there's nothing that's off limits for you to do, period. And you should at least seriously consider, should I pile on to whatever that initiative is? Because clearly it's the bottleneck right now. And the AI, the digital self-management, has made clear what the bottlenecks are. That's how you know. So there's not someone telling you what to do like you might expect. That's what's different. And then what is someone you look up to? It's someone who does good work, and they do it in an upbuilding, friendly way, modeling psychological safety. That is your model contributor. And that's who you end up de facto looking up to. And that's who most of the time Musk tries to be also, and everybody is in group work, highly visible, taking turns with work to share skill and learn skill, attempting to be upbuilding, attempting to be supportive, attempting to be high psychologically safety, avoiding command control language and instead inviting and being okay if people decline. That's your culture. I mean, there's definitely not an all hands meeting where the culture is announced and you get posters with your 5 culture statements. There's none of that. Instead, it's group work, and the way group work is conducted, the mood group work is conducted, is the culture. So encouraging model contributors with the culture you want is the only cultural initiative that's meaningful.
And the teams and the groups you're talking about, they are almost autonomous. They're almost self. You can join. How does that work in practice? How do you, because you get a lot of tasks probably. It's not 20,000 people on one task because that was the most fun. But so somehow they have to level it out and make it into groups of a decent size. 3 to 5, yeah.
Mostly groups of 3 to 5. Humans seem to do that automatically based on what the work is. I mean, if the work is physical, it extremely naturally happens because there's only so many people that can be seeing it and touching it at a time. And unless that's the only work available, then yeah, everyone I'm sure would be rings and rings around that. But when there's plenty of work to do, humans are actually really intelligent species, apparently. And interestingly, I think bacteria feeding does something that visibly looks identical. So maybe I'm giving humans too much credit. Life is amazing. People really do tend to self-organize if there's enough work items for everyone. So I think the architecture is actually what's useful here, that there's enough parallel executing work streams available for humans to self-balance in approximately 3 to 5. So you walk in at 5 p.m. or 5 a.m. depending, or a little bit before, and there's a list of projects that are in flight that are recruiting. That list had no name. I've since thought about it a lot, journaled about it a lot, looked at my photos, looked at my journals from when I was an employee, and I've added what I hope are some important upgrades, and I do now market it. I make it a business thing. I call it the Justice Board, and I teach a class on it, Joe DX, Joe Digital Transformation. And it's one of the 12 aspects that I teach. But in Tesla, it had no name, this list, and you would choose which one you'd walk to. And you could see if the project was oversaturated or undersaturated, just visibly, like body language. It was,
Yeah.
humans are amazing, and they would balance. So right at the start, you might have 50 people. Very often it was around 50 people walk into an area where they could see clearly what was going on, how many people are there. And they would start to, in the first few minutes, walk to different positions and see, is there anyone else there? Are there people that I know I can learn from? Do I feel I can contribute? And people would come and go and rebalance. And some people would walk over to another area where it's harder to see them. It's further away. These are huge buildings. And then the rhythm of work would continue. Because it's 24/7, 365, it's nonstop. There'd be people in all of these areas already. So you could watch what they're doing and see, is this something I think I can meaningfully contribute to? And if you're there a little bit before 5 p.m. or 5 a.m., you can pair with them or join the mob, join the group before they leave and they tag out. But it's a self-organizing system. Now, it's not purely random. The architecture of the products has determined how many work streams there are. So the products are continuously re-architected to have smaller and smaller parallel executable meaningful projects. So you have more and more available as the Musk companies can afford to hire more and more people. You want projects available to them. That's something called Justice's Law. You want an independently testable and releasable and workable work stream for about every 5 people on your staff. So if you have only 5 people, you don't need wonderfully nuanced modular architecture, at least not for load balancing, at least not for personnel balancing. There's some other reasons you might want to consider it. But primarily, it's headcount limited. So as the companies grow and more facilities open, the modular architecture is continually revisited and improved, so these people can work as rapidly as possible. What you don't want is one team that can't start until the next team finishes, a dependency that way. So that's when we introduce an interface and update the list of projects. They're now separated into 2.
But you said that you're tagging. Are you punching into these teams in a way so you get track of hours, or how do you avoid someone just fading around doing nothing in a place like this? if that's if that's a problem at all, I'm not sure if it's.
You know, that actually could happen. There's some reasons it would be unlikely, but it could happen. The people are not measured. The product is measured. So everybody can see if paint quality is improving, or if the heat pump is using less energy, or takes less seconds to switch it when you're simulating maintenance or conducting maintenance. Everyone can see if these KPIs are increasing. That's what's measured. Any one or any team's contribution to it is essentially invisible. But if the KPIs aren't climbing, and the efficiency of that rate of climb is visible, because the cost of running the company, including paying everybody who's there, is visible. You can see how much money is being burned, the burn rate of the company, compared to the rate of climb of all those KPIs. So if that efficiency were to start degrading or climb more slowly or drop, that would trigger a self-analysis. Am I performing well? Are the people around me performing well? What can we do? What's our experiment? but it's not like you have a manager who's saying you were just walking around all day today and not being useful. Like honestly, no one cares. It's it's a very high trust environment is my experience with it. What's important is the product and the processes in the factory improving? The machine that builds the machine, right? Is it improving? That's what's measured. And what the humans and the robots are doing is merely feeding that and not important to individually measure, except for what's required by labor law. As mentioned, I spent most of my time in California. California cares about timesheets. So what you do is you do have a California approved, or in 2020 we did, a California approved badging receiver to say, I've entered the building at this time. I am now paid workforce and an accepted liability of the company. And then when you leave, you do the same thing. That then meets the governance requirements. But inside Tesla, no one cares. Like, just is the product getting better?
Yeah. But I've also heard some rumor. I'm not sure if I heard it from you, but that the teams or the groups can also hire people and even fire people. Is that correct? And how does that work? Because that needs, is it a group hiring and a group firing, or?
It was my first or second week there. 3 of the very experienced people in the area I was working most of the time, they were all fired on the same day. And I was surprised. One of them in particular was mentoring me, and I thought they were phenomenal. I'd actually just sent an email to someone who'd been around a long time saying, I'm really impressed with this person. And they were eliminated. Apparently just someone, not someone with inordinate authority, right? It's a flat system. Someone had said, these people are a liability to the company. They're not doing work, and in fact, they're encouraging a sense of malaise. They're not mission driven. So, human resources as a legal function, agile people operations, eliminated them. And I then said, I actually thought these people were great, and especially this one I'd worked with, not so many days, but a lot in that time. I thought I had even more interaction with them. I thought they were particularly phenomenal. But as far as I know, these other people too. Later that day, they were all offered their jobs back. Like it's simply an open system. Like you could think of it like a playground of kids saying, you don't get to play tag with us. You're too mean. And then later they're playing tag together again, right? It's almost like no one cares. It's just, do you want to work here? Are you doing good work? If people think you're too mean at playing tag and you tag too hard, you're hitting and not tagging, then you don't get to play with us right now. And then someone says, okay, I think you've cooled down. I think you're fun to play with. Come play again. Like, it's bizarre that it works as well as it does, but it truly does. I mean, these are, by objective measures, the highest range, lowest cost to produce, safest cars on planet Earth. So it clearly works. But maybe that sounds ridiculous. But I think part of it is because there's no penalty to be hired or fired. It is almost as innocent as kids playing tag, right? I mean, if you're employed or not, it's like really not that big a deal. That maybe just sounds absurd.
It's amazing, and that's the reason why I think that you could in Norway it couldn't work like that, because the employee is too secured in a way. So it had to be inside the company. That's why I thought of that idea of having this kind of dream team within a company in a way, and you're out of that dream team just because of whatever, and you're back in when you. That's super interesting. It's really it's a new way of organizing, and it's extremely fun to talk to you, Joe Justice, and I hope we could talk again later, because I really appreciate what you're bringing to the table here, and I can see that you are kind of mission driven also to get it out there, to actually wake up, because this is something new, and it's not that I don't think we should take all the ideas about 12-hour shifts, and I don't think that is unrealistic in a lot of businesses, but how they are thinking about how they are so extremely mission driven and actually make it work. I think and as you say, it's a fun place to work, and then they are kind of ticking off the most important box in a way. and doing something sustainable. So it's, yeah.
You've deeply intrigued me, the idea of like an elite team. It makes me think of in a company, if you had a group that you could join or not join anytime, and there's no career consequence whether you do or not, you simply can opt in. And in that group, you could choose to operate with what I would call a very agile set of rules. That might be a model worth exploring. You've intrigued me, John. I'll play with that further. Maybe we'll have a second shot. Thank you so much. My pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Joe Justice. It's really a pleasure for me too. Thank you. Okay, then we stop recording, and I want to thank you again.